So as a leader, I want you to be transparent about the process with your team. Your team wants to know how they individually contribute to the organization's success. And if you don't know, or if you are new to your organization and don't understand the planning process, you need to ask someone, your manager, your finance partner, get to know how the business runs and how the business plans. So if you are a leader with a team, when was the last time you talked about the planning process with your team? Welcome to You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. You are ambitious in life and in your career, but something is missing. You want to bring more of your passion to what you do. Because let's be honest, you pour a ton into your work, and it needs to mean more. I'm your host, Laura Eigel. I'm a mom, wife, PhD, coach, advocate, introvert, and indoor rowing fanatic. I'm passionate about living a life that's in line with my values. We'll give you the actionable tips and tools you need to lead with your values, make a difference, and have career success. The world needs more diversity and authenticity in the top jobs at organizations. Your leadership belongs there. You belong in the C-Suite. If you've been listening to this podcast regularly, or if you know me well, you know I live a life and career aligned with my values, and I help others to do the same. Last weekend, I was out with a good friend. My leadership coach self can't help but ask my friends how their jobs are going. Work is such a big part of life, and there's so much change going on right now for everyone. After a long discussion, my friend called me a career therapist. It was the best compliment ever. No, I'm not a real therapist, but I can help you find career clarity, to give you clarity on what matters most. And that's why I've built the You Belong in the C-Suite group coaching program. In the 6-month program, I help you gain clarity on what matters most, create the action plan to get there, to reach career fulfillment, and lead as your authentic self. Here's what some of the program participants are saying. Because of this program, I've been more intentional about understanding my values and aligning my professional and personal life according to what I value most. I've also taken the time to deeply reflect on how I want to show up as a leader. This program has shown me that it's okay to make decisions that are truly in my best interests. I know that if I'm 100% true to myself, I can lead in more powerful and impactful ways. Another participant said, participating in this program helped me gain the clarity I needed on what was most important to me in my career. The exercises, reflections, and conversations with supported women have helped me to make a career change that I would not have otherwise made. The structured framework coupled with the dynamic dialogue allows for personalized experience in a group setting. Best of both worlds. If you are a high-achieving woman and want more fulfillment in your work, learn more at thecatchgroup.com. Apply to You Belong in the C-Suite group coaching program now. Welcome to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. This week's episode is inspired by work that I've been doing with several clients. The clients that I coach and work with are senior leaders in organizations. Many of them are coming into their strategic planning cycles, preparing for their next fiscal year. They are deep into the planning process that they've done year after year after year. And the question that I've been asking them is, how are you planning your leadership like you're strategically planning for the business? How is your leadership showing up? Are you planning for that? Are you being intentional? What is your leadership annual operating plan? And that's what we're going to discuss in today's episode. Today, I'm going to talk about how your leadership fits into your business planning cycle and the importance of it. Our listeners are in different stages of their careers. So I want to start with some terminology. I've spent the majority of my HR career at a Fortune 50 company with standard operating business procedures and planning processes. Many companies have similar processes, and some companies have the process but don't always adhere to it. But I'll break it down for you simply so that we are all using the same language. I'm going to describe these in the terms that I know that are hopefully easy to explain and that are from my experience. So first, companies want to grow and they want to build out a roadmap to get there. It's usually called a strategic plan or a strat plan for short. These are big goals that the company wants to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years. They may generally know the way that they want to get there, but it isn't an exact science in many industries. To get down to what they need to do each year, companies build out an annual operating plan that ties into their strategic plan. An annual operating plan is sometimes called an AOP. So in AOP, those break down what a company needs to do to achieve their goal for that year to be in line with that long-term plan. So for instance, a company, if they have a goal to double their revenue in 3 years and to increase market share to be a leader in their industry as their strategic goal, then their annual operating plan, their AOP, would be seen as what the company needs to do in that first year to be on track to meet that 3-year goal. So usually companies have a strategic plan or long-term vision that remains consistent for 3 to 5 years, although they do revisit it every year to figure out what changes to be made. However, the annual operating plan, the AOP, will absolutely change from year to year. The strategic plan has to be specific enough to build a roadmap and an annual operating plan, but flexible enough to meet the demands of the market or industry. For instance, strategic plans in 2019 most likely did not account for a global pandemic. In those instances, companies had to shift their 2020 AOP, their annual operating plan, significantly to meet the demands. Some companies even had to throw away their strategic plan because their industries in retail or hospitality, because the landscape shifted so much, they just needed to survive. But holistically, we think about strategic plans. Those are generally more consistent for long-term goals, but the how to get there, the annual operating plan, the AOP, may shift more from year to year. And right now, many companies are in their strategic planning and annual operating planning cycles if their company's fiscal year is on the calendar year. So not all companies have a fiscal year that aligns with their calendar year. I've worked for multiple companies that have had different fiscal calendars. However, no matter what your fiscal calendar is, you'll all have some version of strategic planning and annual operating plan process. You'll just do it at different times of the year. I've been working with multiple organizations and leaders over the last few months, and the common question that I've been asking is, where does your leadership fit into your strategic planning process and annual operating plan? Some of those leaders weren't really sure what to make of my question. So I want to dig in on why this is so important, maybe even more important than your actual strat plan or AOP. I want you to visit your leadership often or more often than your strat plan or AOP. First, I want your leadership to show up as transparently as possible by talking about these processes with your team. Explain how planning works so that employees can understand how their individual goals contribute to the organization's long-term goals. That's really powerful to really understand as an employee what I'm doing actually matters and how it builds into my team's success and the organization's annual success and the organization's long-term success. And as a leader, it's your job to explain how that happens. So first and foremost, know what your organization's strategic planning process and AOP process look like and how you and your team fit into it. You might be leading some of those planning initiatives within your company. You may have a piece of the process, building a part of the plan that rolls up to a bigger plan. You may only be involved in the annual operating process after your senior leader updates you on the strategic plan. Or you might just be an individual that has team goals and you're really unsure on how those even got to you or how they roll up to the overall plans. Awareness of this process and your link to it is crucial to know your business and to lead in your company, no matter where you sit in the company. So as a leader, I want you to be transparent about the process with your team. Your team wants to know how they individually contribute to the organization's success. And if you don't know, or if you are new to your organization and don't understand the planning process, you need to ask someone, your manager, your finance partner. Get to know how the business runs and how the business plans. So if you are a leader with a team, when was the last time you talked about the planning process with your team? If it wasn't this year, then you need to reshare that process with them. I really feel like leaders get so used to being part of these planning processes, they don't realize that some of these processes, their teams it feels like a black box. Like, how do these decisions get made? What is the process? Who's even making these decisions? And teams need to understand that process and how your team fits into it. Explain to them when you're involved in the process, how the information is cascaded within the organization. You may not think it's very interesting or that they won't care about it, but I will tell you, they do care. Even if you can't talk about the outcome of the process, revealing, the strategic plan just yet, you can talk about how the company gets to it. And that kind of transparency with your team, telling them how things get done, how decisions get made, is an easy way and often overlooked way of creating transparency within an organization. Often leaders in higher positions, they just underestimate what information their teams have. It's because you've been in your role for a while. You know the process so well. Don't take that for granted. Not everyone understands or knows the process. Tell them about it and tell them about your experience in it. But most importantly, tell them about how the process will play out and how your team and their individual roles will contribute to that. So here's an example of how you can do that. So I want you to intentionally set some time, build time in as an agenda item in your next team meeting. So talk about the strategic planning process and your annual operating process. Give the team a high-level overview of the process. For instance, you can explain how every year senior leaders review our long-term goals, which is the strategic plan for the company. We do that in July. We do that by reviewing data. Each department head gets to weigh in on the internal and external data and what we think our strategic plan, how it should be tweaked. That gets done through a series of meetings and presentations. After senior leadership has approved the plan, we then start building our annual operating plan for the next year. And this is really the how of how we'll get there, how we'll get to those year one objectives of the strat plan. These are more detailed, and we usually do that in September of the previous fiscal year. And you might say, I'm not involved in the strat plan, but I am involved in the annual operating plan. I know what to build for AOP given the strat plan. That's when we usually get together as a team and weigh in on our AOP goals. Then those get presented to senior leaders at the next level down in the organization and solidified by November. So we have a solid plan going into our next fiscal year. And then in January, we build out our team objectives based on our AOP. And that's when you'll work on your individual objectives and the goals for the year. And that's how your individual contribution will impact not only our team's annual goals, but the organization's annual plan, which contributes to our overall success for the strat plan. So that's just one example of how you can be transparent in the process, but also make the tie from the individual to the overall organizational impact. Build in time in your team meeting to discuss these things. Have an open dialogue and let them ask questions, any questions, including not even understanding key terms. Have your finance partner or strategy partner on the call if you want. If you don't know the answer, you can tell them that you can get back to them. But the key here is to be transparent about the process, your role in it, and their roles, but ultimately how their individual contribution ties to the organization's long-term goals. Another way that I'd like you to consider how your leadership shows up in the annual operating plan and strategic planning process is how you'll show up as a leader within the year. We spend so much time planning for business success, but are you planning for your own leadership success? You can utilize the strategic planning and annual operating plan process as a model for planning out how you will show up as a leader. First, what's your strategy? I'd suggest you probably already have one. It's what matters most to you. It's your values. Your values can serve as your long-term measures of success and how you are showing up. I want you to do a strategic review of your values. Do those still resonate with you? Are those values still most important? If you've never done this, understanding your values, you may need to start by literally identifying them. You can do this easily with our free values worksheet available at thecatchgroup.com. Also, I talk through how I identified my values in episode number 1 of this podcast. It only takes about 15 to 20 minutes, and you can get an understanding of what is most important to you and how you can use that to guide your life and your career and really your authentic leadership. If you've already understood your values and know what those core values are, this is a great time to do your values check-in. That's basically a review of your values and an annual review of that strategic plan that guides you. You can get a free copy of the values check-in by joining our You Belong in the C-Suite community. In that community, I send out weekly emails with different tools to help you live a life and career guided by your values. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. So what's your strategic plan? Have you reviewed it? Those are your values. Next, do your annual operating plan. How will your values show up in your next year? Let me explain with an example. My values are family, growth, development, achievement, advocacy, and balance. How do those show up in my leadership? How do I know if I'm living those? I'll give you a couple of examples. For development, if I'm showing up successfully and living that value of development, that means I'm actively engaging in developing my team. We might have team development objectives. For instance, one year within the team that I was leading, we built capability of the team in financial forecasting and budget management. We all needed to get better at it. It made us better partners and better at our jobs. For my value of advocacy, I define that as championing talent within my team and across other teams to ensure that I was a voice for them in rooms that they were not in. That may include talent conversations, talking about how great they were to their managers, or creating critical experiences for people to ensure that they kept showing up and growing in their roles. So just like in an organization or a business you work in, you need to think about long-term and short-term planning for success. You need to do that same thing for your authentic leadership. Today, we talked about the importance of knowing your company's strategic planning and AOP process, the importance of being transparent with your team about that process, and how their individual goals roll up to the organization's goals. We also talked about the importance of doing the same process for your leadership, understanding your values, which is your long-term or strategic plan, and then how those values show up in your annual plan. How are you showing up as a leader? We've given you some tools to figure those out, our values worksheet and our values check-in. I hope this episode encourages you to be as strategic with your own leadership as you are in the business that you work in. Plan for your success, check in quarterly, get feedback from your team, and make a plan to lead authentically. Lead with your values first. Now it's up to you. Take action and do some intentional self-reflection. We'll link the worksheets in our show notes. This is a great next action step to check in with your values, how they're showing up in your life, and plan for how your leadership will show up to support and accelerate your business strategic plan and next year's annual operating plan. Remember, your leadership belongs here. You belong in the C-suite. That wraps up today's episode. Thanks. What gets you up in the morning? What drives your decisions? What do you stand for? No idea, not even sure where to start? I use my values to guide my life and career. It's the basis of how I've built boundaries for myself and stuck to them. Are you ready to dig into what matters to you? Go to thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet. That's thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet to get to your core values and take action on what matters most. I want to thank you so much for listening to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts. By leaving a review, you are helping others find this content. We will be featuring 5-star reviews on air in upcoming episodes. Editing and support for the podcast is done by S&E Podcast Management. To get more tips and tools to help you live a life guided by your values, go to thecatchgroup.com. Keep your boundaries and take care.